Hello there and welcome to my corner of the internet. Thank you for being here. Today I would like to talk about Appleby Farm by Cathy Bramley. Appleby Farm is a lovely book. The subtitle for the book is There's Simply No Place Like Home. That captures the book's essence so well. Oops! Not sure if it's better. The main character, Freya, is portrayed as a person lost in life or someone who hasn't found her path, wandering from one job to another. At the beginning of the story, Freya is working at a cafe in Kingsfield, England. It is mentioned in the book that she's quite good at picking up skills. She's quite good at adapting to different jobs, and she's quite good at finding her strengths in them quickly. She develops her skills quite fast and then looks for a challenge in the job after she's kind of mastered the position, because she learns quickly, which is amazing. Freya has a good life. She has a boyfriend, a best friend, her boss is quite nice, and she's generally happy with her life at this point. Then suddenly a call from her Aunt Sue informs her that her uncle Arthur, he has been hospitalized, and Freya immediately drops everything and rushes to Appleby Farm to help out her family, also her aunt, with the extra workload now that her uncle is unable to work suddenly. Because the truth of the matter is that Appleby Farm is her home. Part of her background is that with her family, she moved around the world quite often, so she never really got to feel at home in one place. Appleby Farm is the only place she's ever called home. So, of course, this is her family, so immediately she rushes to the farm to help out. And would you guess, she gradually develops a liking to the farm tasks, whatever needs doing. And just as a note, I found it delightful that Freya wasn't afraid of mud or rain. She was always out when she needed to be out. She was running the farm, she was doing her job regardless of the weather conditions. Kudos to Freya, because rain and therefore mud is quite a common element in England, where of course the story is set. I read this book in my home country during summer, which I enjoyed a lot because it was warm and dry, as I myself personally dislike rain. Kudos to Freya, but I couldn't. I found the book in my local library. I had been specifically looking for a fun, light, vibey, cozy summer read, which is a quest in which I had failed tremendously previously. When I found Appleby Farm, I knew I succeeded, and when I read it, I was like, yes. When I read it, I knew this was what I had been looking for. It met all my requirements for a fun, light summer read. As this is a library book, I didn't make any annotations in it, and because I was traveling, I didn't really make separate notes either. Also, just note-taking on separate paper is just a bit tedious, because, when you're referring to something, either you have to write out the whole sentence or whole part that you're referring to, or mark somehow that page X, paragraph Y, and then if you want to look it back up, then you have to have the exact same edition. Yeah, it's a bit... So for this book, I just have very few notes. I can't really recall all my thoughts I had during reading, but I do know that this book is a very cute, light read with not so many deep insights, which is, not necessarily a bad thing. This is what I was aiming for, and I got that exactly. One thing that this book had, which I appreciated a lot, was the realistic portrayal of difficulties in life. There were some financial challenges, relationship concerns, and they were all included to varying degrees where it suited the story, which I found amazing. A lot of the problems weren't just made up or like fairy tale problems. Also, they weren't solved with like a happy ever after type of fairy tale solution. The whole farm life wasn't this idealistic, perfect English countryside type of vibe, but there were problems. Freya and her friends and crew and family overcame them, and it was lovely to read. Also, I appreciated a lot that, for example, the relationship that Freya had wasn't given up immediately at the first sight of difficulties upon seeing differences between the two people. One of the first concerns that arose in the relationship was that Freya was called home to the farm and she quite liked it there. Her boyfriend, not so much. He enjoys gardening and he liked being at the farm and whatnot, but he is like a city boy. So everything wasn't black and white, which was delightful to read because often in books things are black and white. The setting seems to be very researched. I don't know all that much about farm life and managing farms. I have only worked on a few in my lifetime, like similar to Freya. I had some odd jobs here and there, was traveling around a bit. So I do have some farm experience, but I couldn't say I know how to manage a farm and I know everything about running a farm. But as far as I am concerned, everything seems real and true in the book. It was also nice as a layperson to read the little snippets of farm management. Despite the book being 470 something pages long, I had no major concerns about the length of the book because the vibe and aesthetic of the book were consistent throughout. It was just nice to read. Even the slow scenes were asked for, basically. They were placed there for a reason. So overall, I think the story was well paced. At this point, I do have to mention that I might be a little bit biased because I tend to enjoy reading books that have a big romance part. Also, themes like closeness to nature, farm or rural aesthetic or lifestyle. These type of things always win me over, or at least tilt me towards liking the book more. And this book, of course, checks out all of those boxes, so I might be a little bit biased about the rating of the book, but drumroll, I did give the book 5 stars. In my opinion, this book highlights common experiences of young adults. Maybe this has been present in other generations as well, but specifically I see this in Gen Z who are lost in life or find it difficult to find their path after university or high school. And I also find it relatable to myself. I think that is maybe one insight that this book has, and maybe one of the main themes that are overcome in this book. Freya's past included various odd jobs all around the world, such as the edited highlights of my career included apple picker in New Zealand, stable hand in Dubai, chalet girl in Austria, barmaid in Cornwall, 18 months, a personal record for me, largely down to a lifeguard called Ivan. A short-lived stint as a tour guide at a pencil museum, and now here waitress in the Shenton Road Cafe in Kingsfield. She also mentions here, I was sure all the random experience I'd gain was preparing me for something. I just wished I knew what that something was. This experience that Freya has resonates with my urge, and I think my generation's urge to wander around, to make life interesting, to gain experience, but not necessarily settle down or commit to one path. I definitely enjoyed reading Appleby Farm during summer in a warm, dry country. But honestly, I recommend it for any season other than winter, I think. I recommend this book for people who want to read something light and fun. As I said, I myself was looking for a fun, light read, and I found that Appleby Farm finally fit all my requirements. Also, for people who are craving a bit of romance, again, I usually enjoy books with romance in them, so I might be a bit biased here, but also people who don't like romance might want to skip some parts. For people who desire reading about closeness to nature or a farm or rural lifestyle, I absolutely enjoy this book because of exactly that. People who enjoy a bit of family drama, this will definitely have that in a little capacity. People who would like to follow a girl's journey of turning a failing farm around and finding and developing her life dream, finding herself through the farm that she used to and still calls home. I definitely do not recommend this book to people who are looking for a very complex, multi-layered read, or people who are expecting huge plot twists, or people who don't like romance so much. In closing, Appleby Farm is a very cute, lovely book that deserves a full 5 stars from me. For anyone searching for a narrative that truly feels real while offering a charming escape at the same time, this book delivers. It beautifully captures the relatable journey of a young adult, Freya, navigating uncertainty and slowly discovering her true life path and purpose through the challenges and joys of farm life. This actually resonated with me profoundly, and I think it would for many young adults nowadays. I especially appreciated how the story embraced the slow process of her realization while she was dealing with realistic concerns and relationship difficulties with a genuine, not so simple, unsimplistic approach rather than just some happy ever after. If you're looking for a fun, light read that provides a homey aesthetic filled with a bit of romance, a bit of family drama, closeness to nature, then look no further than Appleby Farm. I mean, maybe you can look further. I'm sure there are amazing books that are quite similar to this, but Appleby Farm should be on the way. Just give it a read next summer or something. Have fun. We're holding today's session in this lovely corner of my room. I'm really feeling the autumn vibe at the moment. I have some decoration on my table usually. I just put it here for you. Story time. I found this in my local secondhand bookstore, The Six of Crows, about which I have heard very good things. So I thought that I would pick it up because honestly the price was a bargain. So I thought I would see what it's all about. I'm not intending to watch the Netflix show because I don't really watch anything on Netflix anymore. However, after that I happened upon a gorgeous collector's edition of Shadow and Bone in the library, and I googled if I need to read that before Six of Crows, and many people on the internet told me that actually Six of Crows and this duology would make more sense if I already was kind of familiar with the Grishaverse. Most people recommended reading Shadow and Bone and that trilogy before Six of Crows. I thought, why not? The collector's edition book looked so pretty, so I thought that I can definitely read that. And I can't show it to you because I took it out from the library among some other books, and I actually started reading the other books first, which meant that a very minimal time was left for me to read Shadow and Bone until I had to give the book back to the library. So I rushed through the book. I enjoyed it, and I was able to immerse myself in it to the right amount, but still I kind of rushed through it because of the deadline. So I don't have it with me, but when I gave it back, I took out Siege and Storm. This is unfortunately not a gorgeous collector's edition. I picked up Siege and Storm and started reading it because actually after Shadow and Bone I was really curious what the trilogy had in store, so I wanted to read on. Oh boy. Okay, about the review, where do I start? Well, maybe let's start with the summary, explaining what the book is about, actually. I'm so bad at summaries. Shadow and Bone is about a girl called Alina Starkov. She's an orphan. She hasn't really been good at anything in her life. She doesn't really have any outstanding strength. But then suddenly it turns out that she has like magical abilities and she's a Grisha, which is basically... There are different types of Grisha who have different kinds of powers. They're usually held in a high esteem in the kingdom. And honestly, I can't really summarize this book. It's about nothing. I'm not sure what to tell you about this book, but I can tell you about my thoughts on it. When I was reading the book, I felt like it was very fast-paced, but in the bad way. It was lacking detail in a lot of ways. I don't know if the review about Uprooted is before or after this review, but reading Uprooted, I was also thinking that some details were sometimes a bit overlooked or not resolved in some way, but there it actually made sense because it was more a fairy tale-esque story, and in fairy tales you don't always know all the details, and here it was really just fast, getting to the action. It was very, very much plot driven. I would have liked to know more about the characters, their backgrounds, their feelings, their thoughts, and that would have also given more to the story because of the arc that we would have gone through. Because, you know, if a character starts out as nothing, as a skill-less, strengthless girl, and then throughout the book and throughout the trilogy, she would have grown into her own and she would have developed, and we would have seen her feelings and thoughts all throughout this, and she would have grown based on those instead of the plot. I think that would have been much more valuable, and here it didn't happen this way. Because of this, my impression of the main character was just that she was stupid, frankly, going with the flow and not taking action in any which way, which was very annoying. She was always just leaving herself to the whims of others. So yeah, reading Shadow and Bone was enjoyable, hence why I took out the second book in the trilogy. I wanted to know what happened next, but it had little substance. It was very much like reading Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. Felt very similarly about that one. Every single character in this book, especially Alina, our main character, was so bland and two-dimensional, and only the Darkling was the one who gave the story a bit of a color, but we never actually got to know the Darkling. And in the first book, that was kind of fine with me. I was mainly interested in learning more about him and his background and why he's doing the things he's doing, his motivations. So I kept on reading the trilogy. But yeah, we never actually got to know anything about the Darkling either. As I've read some reviews, other people also would have enjoyed the book and the trilogy more if we got to know the Darkling a bit more, because he was honestly carrying the whole thing. But yeah, overall, the first book was pretty enjoyable, though for me to wholeheartedly state that, I have to disregard Alina completely and her meekness. So I was curious what the next book offered, and oh boy, did I got something! Okay, so we go on to Siege and Ruin, and in the second book in this trilogy, we continue with the plot. Basically, Alina still has powers. She's still a magic holder. The Darkling still wants her. Yeah, that's basically the plot. I started reading this book thinking that, oh, maybe here we see the characters blossom a bit more. We will learn a bit more about the Darkling and Alina, and maybe they will get some personality, especially Alina. She really needs some. But then I was reading. I was getting more and more annoyed, more and more frustrated, and this was the point. This. At 23% read, 100 pages out of 435. I put down the book with the notion that I might pick it up again, might not, until I have to bring it back to the library. Because at that point, I couldn't take anymore. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I never really picked it up again. I did kind of skim through the book, basically. I skimmed through most of it and I read the last chapter. And to be honest, I don't think I missed anything. I think the story is complete in my head. I think I got the gist of it. But anyway, I am going to talk about the first 100 pages and why it pissed me off so much. In the end, I'm actually convinced that I will start reading Six of Crows just to see if it's better, because people say that it is better, so I'm curious. And honestly, I should have just done that in the beginning. I shouldn't have read Shadow and Bone whatsoever. But now that I have, first and foremost, the thing that really, really annoyed me, even in Shadow and Bone, but starting to read Siege and Storm, I was even more annoyed with how bland Alina was. She doesn't have any personality. I couldn't tell you one thing about her except for her having magic. Which then, small spoiler alert, honestly, it makes sense that she chooses... What's his name? Mal? So it makes sense that she chooses Mal, who is equally bland and boring. The Darkling would have been really interesting. He would have been a good character. He would be the only good character in this whole series if we got to know him at all. If I were to name one thing that annoyed me most about this book, especially Siege and Storm, would be Alina's response to anything to do with the Darkling. Whenever the Darkling speaks and tries to tell her something and tries to have a conversation, Alina just goes ba 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 ba. She disregards anything he's trying to say. She doesn't want to hear whatever the Darkling wants to conversate with her. Therefore, we, as the reader, we don't get anything about the Darkling. We don't know anything because she doesn't let him speak. She doesn't ask him things. She doesn't want to know anything about him or about his motivations. She just disregards everything. That annoyed me so much. And I think that's because she's so weak and bland that I think she's afraid that she will believe him immediately if she hears him out, or if she just doesn't cover her ears, because she's just very impressionable. So she will just believe anything that's being told to her. Actually, this reminds me of something that I heard in a podcast. Someone mentioned in this podcast episode Dia Khan, who is a Muslim woman. I think the story started with her posting something somewhere online, and she started getting threats on her life. And it escalated to the point where the police told her to stay away from open windows. And her response to this was that instead of hiding or shouting louder than the oppressor, she went out of her way to meet these people who were these far-right people, and she went out of her way to talk with them, to meet with them, to hear them out. She doesn't agree with them. She never justified their views, but she did listen. She gave them a safe space to talk. Eventually, these people started falling out of the movement one by one because they couldn't match their views with the fact that now they were friends with a Muslim woman. Simon Sinek commented on this with a very good sentence, I think. Meet emotion with emotion. And I want to remember this story. Maybe not to this extreme, but I would like to integrate this type of behavior into my life more and more, because I think through emotion and humanity can the world evolve. So I got reminded of this little story because of how Alina was doing the opposite with the Darkling. There is an oppressor, there is a evil, but we don't know his motivations, we don't know anything about him, so can we really call him evil? And that's another philosophical question. But there is this quote-unquote evil, and she just doesn't meet him where he is. She doesn't talk to him. She just tries to go against him no matter what. And why? We don't know anything about him, and she doesn't have the 2 brain cells to form coherent thoughts. So how can she decide that now she just wants to go against him no matter what? Can't comprehend what's happening. This is gonna be in no order whatsoever. I'm just kind of going through my notes that I was taking while reading the first 100 pages of Siege and Storm. So I pasted here one review from Storygraph, and this person said, the main problem with Mal is that they are so incompatible. They have literally nothing in common, completely different wants and goals in life. Mal is not Grisha, while Alina is, and they have 0 chemistry and 0 spark. They are absolutely no fun together. Agreed. Completely agreed. Mal is the most boring choice Alina could make, which kind of makes sense because Alina herself is kind of weak and boring and bland. So yeah, even when the Darkling mentions to Alina this exact thought, something like, you and Mal would never work because he's not Grisha and you have completely different trajectories in life. Same thing, Alina just goes, la 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 la, can't hear you. She's touched for a second, feels sad, and she contemplates this for a second, and then she just goes, nah, I'll deal with that later, or something like that, which is just, what the girl? Also, the author didn't do much to challenge the idea of worth equals beauty, because all throughout these 2 books that I have knowledge of keeps equating worth with beauty, and that could be a fun idea to work with in a series, but she doesn't do anything with it. Nothing made sense as an action. Everything seemed random. Now they're on a boat. Now they're in a random house. Now randomly the Darkling appears. Now they're on a boat again. Now they're saved by some boatman. Just things happen without any emotional connection between them or any developmental arc between them. Just things happen in the plot because the plot drives this whole book and 2 books that I have read so far and will ever read from this trilogy. And okay, the exact moment I put down this book in my final frustration was the point when I realized that Alina never looked at the book with the Saints. My thought process, okay? So what I see, she has the book, right? She never looks at it, never investigates, never sees what it's about. Then she accidentally sees a picture in there that is a huge hint, means a lot for her future. Then she doesn't know what to do with that information. She needs more information, right? Then she goes on to whine a little bit about not knowing what to do, which is all fine and dandy. But then she goes on to whine about not knowing what to do while she has a book in her hand. Books usually contain information. And this book has already given her information, so, there could be some other information in there that would be important for her. But no, she doesn't even think about investigating in the book because she categorically dismisses this book because it's a children's book, so it cannot contain any useful information, obviously. Well, maybe if one picture in there was already valuable to you, then maybe other pictures in there could help you, maybe some text in there could help you. No, that book is just a children's book. Okay, sure. So this was the point when I finally completely gave up the book. Another thing, and this could be minor, I could see why this wouldn't bother some people, but for me it was very annoying. There was basically no effort put into imagining this fantasy world. The fantasy world is very clearly based on Russia, Scandinavia, England, and possibly I think Netherlands a little bit, and this makes the book unenjoyable for me because I can't immerse myself in the fantasy world because I just keep imagining the real world. As far as I can see, the main land where they're from and their names as well. That's basically like Russia, and then the north of that land is basically Scandinavia. To the south, I think it's some kind of Asian, if I remember correctly. When they sail over to the west, then it's England-esque names, and then there is like one little island, and also the ship that Alina and Mal was sailing across the ocean with. I think that was kind of Netherlands based, the language as well. And also some names were just very distracting. Like one guy is named Privyet. Why would you call someone Privyet? It was just throwing me off every time I read it. It's like somebody's called Hi. Why? Also, this is like nitpicking, okay? But Genya also means something in my language, which is like a not widely known language. So I don't blame anyone for not knowing that, but still. And it means something mean. You say that somebody is Genya, it means that that person is kind of rude. So every time I read her name on the page, I was like, I don't like her. And honestly, sometimes the use of foreign words was very unnecessary, and this was true in Shadow and Bone as well. I think mostly in Shadow and Bone. Sometimes I get the use of a foreign word. For example, kefta is something unique and an identifier in this word. Okay, I get that. But some other times it's just completely unnecessary to use the foreign word. The English word for that thing would suffice just as well, because that just wouldn't confuse the reader. So if they're having breakfast, just call it breakfast. You don't need the foreign local name for it. You can just use the English word. By this point, I can tell you that I hate Alina with a passion. Mal is kinda okay, in my opinion. He is super boring, but he's like fine. And the Darkling could have been interesting if we ever got to know him or heard him out beyond the I'm so evil, muhahaha thing, which is just weird. Would have liked to know more about the antagonist, but oh well, maybe I'm wishing for too much. I'm very curious to see what Six of Crows is holding for me. I've mostly heard good things about it, but there is one channel that I actually really like, Books and Borders. There just reviewed this book. We usually have very similar opinions on books, so I'm not sure what to think about it, but I will definitely start reading it and see. Hi, I have just read DallerGut Dream Department Store. It says it's a Korean #1 bestseller book. I do not understand why. If anyone speaks Korean and have read or would like to read this book in Korean, please tell me if it's good in Korean, because in English it's not. It says it's translated by Sandy Yosun Jusun Lee, and I'm sorry, honey, but I did not like your translation, your work on this book, or the original book. The original writer is a bit bland. I do not know. It can also be that there are some cultural differences that I cannot grasp with my European mind. But first things first, the plot. What plot? The story is about a little town where there is a dream department store owned by a man called DallerGut, hence the name DallerGut Dream Department Store. The whole idea is that people go to sleep, they go to this store or any rivaling store, I guess, but we don't really get deep insight into the rivals and why they would choose this store and how the customers choose a store when they don't even know that they go to this store. Basically, you fall asleep any regular person, me, you, go to sleep and you visit this store, look for a dream that you would like to dream that night, buy it, and you dream it. First I thought, that's a very capitalistic way of thinking about it, which is not necessarily bad, but like for dreams, I would think it's a bit weird that you have to spend money on a dream. But then it turns out that you just have to be moved by the dream, basically. So how this works is that you purchase a dream, which means you just walk out with the dream. You dream that dream, and however long after you feel something about this dream, you pay it back to the store in emotion. So if you work through a trauma or a strong feeling of some sort, or being stuck in life through going through a dream, then you get this emotion of resolve, flutter, happiness, contentment, whatever emotion you feel afterward, you pay that back to the store. And these emotions are actually worth a lot. It's kind of like a stock market. The value of flutter or contentment goes up or down. That's how the store operates. I didn't know anything about this book. I just saw it in my library. I thought that this was an interesting idea, and I actually really like the cover. I thought, let's give it a try. It sounds like a fun, quick read. Maybe it will evoke some emotions in me. Maybe I will realize something about dreams I hadn't known before. However, the book was not a breeze. What can I say about this book? Again, maybe this is something cultural that I just couldn't understand how this culture is different, but there is a translator's note, and the translator says that she tried to translate this work into the English-speaking culture as well. So she tried to translate culturally as well, which is a really good thing. She should have. But I don't think she succeeded in that, because I did not feel like this was a good story. And again, I don't know if it's the translator's fault or the writer's fault. Maybe the translator did everything she could. Maybe it's the writer. I don't know. My main problem was that I wasn't invested in the story because there wasn't enough detail in the story. There was a really good base idea. I really like the idea of there being a dream store, there being dream makers, which is kind of like a film maker. I really like this whole idea, this whole world, this whole setup. It started out very well, but that's basically it. We don't go any deeper into it. We don't get the details of how these payments are made, how the dream makers make the dreams, how the dreams can be dreamt, the inner workings of the store, or this weird little town where there is a dream store and everybody in this town aspires to work in this dream store because this is the biggest tourist attraction basically of the town. How this town works, what are the people in this town like, nightmares, how do nightmares work, why would someone purchase a nightmare? If you are the one who purchased your dreams, why would you want to purchase a nightmare? Of course you wouldn't. There is like a small section about nightmares. There is one guy who has this trauma from the military and he does choose to receive a dream that can be described as a nightmare, I guess. But there are the more generic type of nightmares that you just randomly get. The basic nightmares. Why would you get those? Like, how does it work? Anyway, the point is that I had a lot of questions and they were not answered. This idea, this fantasy land of dreams and dream makers and dream store is not very well fleshed out, as well as the characters. I did not connect to any of the characters. The most interesting characters were the managers on the different floors of the store. They were the most unique, so to say, or the most distinct, but that distinction was basically that each one had one trait. A bit comedic, actually, kind of like a cartoon. I did imagine all of them wearing the same outfit each and every day. I think the most interesting stories that we got were not from the main characters, but actually the few people we focused on who bought dreams from this store. Randomly, we picked out a few people from the world, I guess, who had a personal difficulty or something and then purchased the dream and it made it better. Those were the most interesting stories, actually, but none of the main characters actually provided any insight to the story, in my opinion, especially the main character. Our main character, Penny, is just very, very, very dumb, flat, two-dimensional. I did not see any depth in her, any of the redeeming qualities, the positive attributes that the managers or DallerGut himself seemed to somehow notice in her. For example, in one part, this boss mentions that he hired her because of her immaculate insights, her excellent observational skills. But this comment refers to a scene where she notices basically that a customer in a hospital gown they were talking to is crying, and this must be a difficult conversation, something like that. Like, it's not a very deep insight. Yeah, anyone can notice that. I don't really understand why this Penny is appreciated so much. I don't see like very unique or different sort of qualities in her that others seem to recognize. So it's just bad writing, I guess. It's a bad character creation. The world building could have been complete, or just could have gone to a bit more depth, or focus on one question if all the details and all the questions feel like too much for a 300-page book, because as it is, it did not give me anything. Maybe this book had like one or two interesting thoughts about dreams that then I could develop on my own or think about on my own, but the book did not give me any insights into those thoughts. It just passed up the thoughts, and they were not anything unique. They were rather basic. I just found them interesting and thought about them on my own without the help of the book. Overall, I was not impressed. I wanted to get through it very quick. So in that sense, it was a breeze, because I breezed through it so that I could be done with it. My final rating for this book would be a 2. Who I would recommend it to? This book is good as a palate cleanser between two books, especially books that are heavier, more difficult, more complex, and you just want to clean your head a little bit between two reads, or in the middle of a series when you've just had enough of the series a little bit, like I'm having at the moment with the Throne of Glass series. It's a bit too much. It's a bit too long. I'm inserting a few books here and there to lighten up my mood, to clean my head. So it's good as a palate cleanser. And remember, do tell me if you've read this in the original language and you have any insights, whether it's good in the original language or not. And as always, please let me know what you think. If you've read this book or would like to read this book, do you disagree, agree, recommendations for me to read? And here I will leave you. Okay, so now a little check-in about Analog Sun by Alex Woodard. I read it as an ebook because I got an advance copy from NetGalley. Thank you so much. The story follows a man named Adam, a traveler from Oklahoma, and he's searching for direction. He's going through all these hoops to end up somewhere, and he encounters Max on his journey. The two of them are very different from one another. Max lives a very simple life. Adam ends up calling him the analog man. First of all, I would like to thank NetGalley and the author for the opportunity of reading this book. Secondly, please note that this is my subjective opinion, and I believe that each and every author deserves fair and honest feedback from their readers, which I am aiming to provide. I started this book with confusion, but I thought, okay, I am confused when starting a new book often enough. That's normal. However, I kept on being confused throughout the book, mainly as to what is even going on here. Even though I wasn't as confused by the end, it still didn't impress me either. I think it was a good book to read and an interesting idea to write a short book about, but it didn't blow my mind, and I suspect it was intended to do so. But then, sometime later, I caught myself still being reminded of this book every now and again. In the story, Adam keeps meeting all sorts of people during his little journey to nothing. And I just felt lost throughout the story, just as Adam. So maybe this was the point. Maybe it was just bad timing for me to read this book when I did. Maybe I just wasn't in the right mood or mindset for it. But I did end up thinking about the message of the book a while after I had finished reading it. The message being about technology and how it controls us, all of us in the modern world, and how we're all addicted to it, and how if you just put down your phone and screens, you can find true freedom. One reviewer on Goodreads said something like, Adam discovers the revolutionary idea of going outside. And honestly, that's a pretty good description of the story. Even though I did end up thinking about these questions and ideas afterwards, I didn't get anything new from it. We all know about this. We hear it from all angles. Put down your phone. Social media is bad for you. Go outside. Aren't you ashamed of your screen time? It is bad. And a story is indeed a good way to reflect on this issue. But as I was reading it, it just kind of felt like, that friend who uses a flip phone because it's so much better. With this book, honestly, I've come to the conclusion that even though this book was not for me, I completely understand why someone might like it, even why someone might think it was an amazing book. I think I recommend this book to a more lyrically inclined reader or someone who appreciates philosophical, contemplative, reflective texts. For that type of a reader, this could be a really great read.